Hello and welcome to So What You're Saying Is. I'm Peter Whittle. Now I'm delighted that my guest this week hasn't been on the channel for quite some time, but he has been called the most important Conservative figure outside Parliament. Tim Montgomery is the co-founder of the Centre for Social Justice. He's also the creator of the Conservative Home Grassroots website, an advisor at Number 10 and a columnist for the Times. I think that's like about five lifetimes in one, Tim, isn't it? Where we actually first met was this thing called 18 Doughty Street. People might not remember this, but this was the first attempt at an internet channel, wasn't it, that you started with Ian Dale?
That's right. It was, and you presented the Culture Clash programme, Peter, on that. And I think we probably had about 3 to 10 viewers most evenings.
But that's not bad.
And I think, it was really hard work, wasn't it? Because you were there and you were very patient. We had a little studio in the back room of this house in Bloomsbury. And I think most nights the internet connections broke down. And of course, it was really before the time people had fast broadband. But if you look at back, not just you, but some of the people who participated in it, they've gone on actually to some good media careers, some good political careers. And I think although it didn't quite triumph 18 Doughty Street, I think it was a good sort of early testing ground for programmes like your own, which have been, I have to say to you, an amazing success. And the New Culture Forum just seems to go from strength to strength. And so many congratulations.
Well, no, thanks. I mean, it's great to be part of this explosion that's happened. I mean, because when we did 18 Doughty Street, I think YouTube wasn't even a thing, was it?
If it was a thing, it was barely noticeable. Yeah. And I think one of the debates we had at that time, and Ian Dale and I have remained friends despite some pretty hot disagreements during that period, was Ian wanted to do sort of quite continuous live broadcasting. And I was much keener in sort of chopping up into little sort of video clips that people could choose at any time. And of course, he's gone on to LBC, where that's exactly what he's doing now, that sort of extended broadcast and long form journalism of the kind that you do, he does, but the BBC, our supposed public service broadcaster, does less and less of. Yeah. And I think we all learned a lot from that. I hope you did.
Yes, definitely.
But it was the technology wasn't really serving us.
No, but the intentions were good, and I think actually, as you say, it had a lot of good quality on it. I said there at the beginning, Tim, you're almost like a kind of historian of the modern Conservative Party, actually. And with a particular perspective from inside and out. By that I mean grassroots and centrally. I'll start by asking you a very bald question. What do you see that's conservative about this Conservative government at the moment?
Very little. Very little. And it saddens me a great deal. And you might want to interrogate me on why I backed Boris Johnson in the first place, because I did. And actually, for a number of years, I was secretly meeting with him and a few others, because way before he became Conservative leader, he was obviously plotting to be Conservative leader. I was meeting in at his home and near his offices when he was Mayor of London about preparing a possible bid, particularly if David Cameron had failed to win that 2015 general election against Ed Miliband. But now I think you can make 3 big criticisms of this Conservative Prime Minister and this Conservative government. And this is my way of circuitous way of answering your question. First of all, I think you can say, is Boris Johnson electable anymore? And I think he is, actually. I'm confident the Tories still can win the next election, mainly because of the weakness of Keir Starmer rather than the strength of the Conservative Party. There's lots of characteristics of now compared to the late sort of major years, which are familiar, sleazy Tories, etc. A government seems to have run out of steam, but Starmer is not Blair. The second thing is the ethical failures that we've seen over Partygate and with a lot of Conservative MPs getting into mischief. But I think the biggest criticism is, okay, maybe we can win the next election, but what are we going to win it for? What's the point? And I know that a few days ago, on Monday, about a week ago, I think, before this YouTube is going out, the Prime Minister was speaking to a fundraising dinner with some of the biggest Tory donors. And he was saying, we're cutting taxes, we're slashing regulation, we're taking advantage of the freedoms of Brexit, and we are controlling immigration, we're building houses. And a couple of donors who I know who were there were looking at one another, and they were saying, is he trying to convince himself, or is he trying to convince us? Because the great criticism of this government is this: it won a majority of 80 in that extraordinary election of 2019, but it is completely frittering it away. And this makes my blood boil, Peter, really, because both of us are old enough to remember we last won a big majority in 1987. We've won one in 2019, 30 years basically on. When is the next time the Conservative Party is going to have a majority big enough to really do things? And yes, we've got Brexit over the line, not particularly using it as opportunities well. But other than that, this government has done very little. And yes, there's been a pandemic, but if William Beveridge could write his report on the welfare state during World War II, well, we could have done a few more things during this Parliament as well.
Yeah. What was your general impression of the way they handled the pandemic?
I think at the beginning, when we didn't know whether COVID was the bubonic plague or a bad flu, I had a lot of sympathy for the initial decision to lock down. But I think over time, the persistence with lockdown and almost like a biomedical state worried me a great deal. And I think the evidence is now in that places like Sweden and Florida, which pursued a policy much more focused on protecting the elderly, the very vulnerable, and less of sort of restricting the liberties and the livelihoods of the vast majority of the population, have proven to be the right way. And you look at Florida now, where Governor DeSantis, very likely leading candidate to be the next president of the United States, the data shows that Florida and California are about in the same place in terms of deaths, etc., at the end of this period. But Florida didn't close down its schools compared to California, so its children are 2 years ahead in education. It didn't close down its schools, so its economies are much more buoyant. It didn't have families locked down, so we haven't got the child abuse, which is one of the most ugly aspects of this lockdown. And my understanding is that one of the things that actually even convinced Nicola Sturgeon in Scotland to eventually lift the lockdown was she saw the data and the statistics, the stories of how some children were being, I won't go into, obviously, talk about some of but how children were being treated at home in some of the worst sort of, domestic situations. And I think, while I understood the initial decision, I think history is going to be very harsh on the decisions that were taken.
I mean, where do you sort of stand now then, Tim? You pretty much cover the waterfront, as I went through, in terms of Conservative politics. You've never wanted to stand, have you, particularly? No. But how do you characterise a Conservative now? I mean, because quite often people say to me, "Are you Conservative?" And I don't know really what to say anymore. I mean, what would you say? How would you define it?
Define what Conservatism is, or what Conservatism should be?
Well, yes, I suppose. Yes, what it would be. What you think it should be?
Well, this may be somewhere where you and I disagree. I don't know, Peter, but I would always say one of the advantages of conservatism is it is very flexible and pragmatic. I think there are one of my favourite philosophers was Michael Novak, Professor Michael Novak, a Catholic theologian and economist, and he, unlike part of the big problem I think in society now, in culture, in economics and politics, is we have more and more people knowing more and more about less and less. if you know what I mean. You know, we see this particularly in academia, people specialising hugely in sociology or economics, and they don't understand, I think, what Matt Ridley says, you know, the ideas and concepts and changing, having sex with each other. You know, if you want to understand our times, you can't just know about science or politics or economics or the rise of China, geopolitics. You have to understand how all these things are interrelated to each other. And the reason why I'm a conservative, I think, and a pragmatic conservative is, I think, as Michael Novak said, you have to understand that we need a strong economy, we need a strong democratic sphere, and we need a strong sort of what he called a moral cultural sphere, a sphere where churches, media, law are producing values, protecting liberties. And all those three things, economy, politics, society, none of them should be too strong or too weak. And I think conservatives at different times will examine, is the economy too powerful or too overridden by the state? Are the institutions of civic society, the small platoons, dying or prospering? How can we support them? And so I think conservatives do stand for different things at different times for very good reasons, if that makes sense. And I think a lot of the people who would define conservatism very narrowly as sort of like a low tax, small state, libertarian thing, I don't think if Mrs. Thatcher was alive today, she would be a Thatcherite as currently understood. She was actually much more pragmatic than people realise. And so my definition of conservatism, if this isn't a cop-out, would be to say, well, where are the problems in Britain today or in the world? And what are we doing about those? So for me, it would be the collapse of the family. It would be the rise of China. It would be the illiberality of universities and values forming, ideas generating institutions. And conservatism should always be trying to moderate the extremes.
You see, that is very helpful, because you see, I would agree, you know, on this point of, there are many people, we're in Westminster, there are many people around here, think tanks and what have you, and they do see things entirely in terms of the market and entirely in terms of a balance sheet. I never have felt that. But one of my big disappointments with the current Conservative government, Tim, has just simply been that I do believe our culture is seriously under attack. And I think that they have been very found wanting on that. I mean, would you agree with that? I mean, I know that, like, say, certain people have said, or Boris even did finally say something about statues coming down. When you talk about the family, when you talk about the advance of critical race theory, of this whole gender theory thing that's going on, I feel that there is very little. These are so important and they require attention. I don't think they get them.
No. I think probably anyone who watches New Culture Forum output will know about the whole idea of the Marxist sort of march through the institutions. And it's not been a march, it's been an absolute rampage. You know, we've lost most of the institutions. The church, of which I'm a member, is used to, if the church can't be Christian, which I find it increasingly fails to be Christian.
You're quite, you're a man of faith, aren't you? I mean, at one point you were even thinking, were you not, of possibly going into the church? Is that right?
No, I was more likely, I think, ever to consider being a priest than an MP, but it was never. It certainly was the case that when I became a Christian at 16, I wanted to sort of give up my politics. I thought, well, this is the most important thing. But like William Wilberforce, really, who really is my hero of. If I have a political hero, William Wilberforce would be my hero. He was persuaded by John Newton, to the author of Amazing Grace, to stay in politics, because I think if you are to obey the commandment to love your neighbour, actually politics is an incredibly important way of. But one of the reasons why I love what you're doing, Peter, is because, of course, politics is downstream from culture. Ultimately, if the universities, the media, the churches, the courts are setting a set of values, it's very difficult for politics to resist that. And I think conservatives have not paid adequate attention to those values generating institutions, which is why your work is so important. And it does drive me mad when the left say it's conservatives that are fighting the culture wars, when of course reality is we're only doing a last ditch, last gasp, and I think you would argue inadequate fight back to those things. But we use the democratic sphere to counter developments that are taking place unaccountably, undemocratically, surreptitiously in the civil service, in universities, in the courts, in supranational institutions.
Pretty much everywhere. I suppose that my frustration often comes with Conservatives. For example, when I was in the London Assembly, great people, I really liked them, but I felt they didn't quite get the extent of it. They tended to see it as political correctness gone mad, that sort of thing, nonsense. And that is not to give it its full, power, I think. And with the church, the church pretty much is hollowing itself out, isn't it? In a way, or should I say the Church of England? Because actually, I should say the Church of England. Yeah. Because during the pandemic, the very time people needed spiritual sustenance, for example, and they closed, didn't they?
Well, I attended, I don't know if you know the Jubilee Centre. Michael Schluter, who ran the Keep Sunday Special campaign years ago, he founded this institute, which had a profound impact on me when I was younger. When I was at university, I went to some of their summer schools. And their big thing that they taught me, which I'm completely convinced of, is that if you look at what the Bible has to say, or Christianity or the major faith has to say to people who follow them, and I think it's relevant to those who don't necessarily follow them. Anyone who's read Tom Holland's magisterial book, Dominion, I think would recognise this, is that the Bible actually understands the way we live on earth very much in relational terms. We should see ourselves as fundamentally relational beings. And when it talks about special responsibilities that we have to the poor and the vulnerable, it doesn't talk so much about income or wealth, it talks about relationships. So it's the widow, it's the orphan, it's the migrant, it's people who are isolated from other forms of community. And that's always really stood by me. I think we do really have, I'm hugely blessed by the family I have, and I think the best start you have in life is to be surrounded by a loving family, particularly an extended family. Not everyone is like, the nuclear family is too vulnerable institutionally, and needs the one thing I do agree with, you'll throw me off this broadcast, Peter, but one thing I do agree with Hillary Clinton, is it takes a village to raise a child.
I think most people would actually agree. Speaking of Hillary Clinton,
just to finish on the point, sorry, I was the one going off on a tangent, but the church doesn't seem to have any of that relational understanding of poverty. So whereas you have a materialist Conservative and Labour Party essentially interested in only material being, the church should be combating that, but instead, on almost every issue, the Anglican Church, Lambeth Palace, not so far away from where we're recording, will just echo the materialist thinking of the left all the time. And they used to say that the left was, a battle between Methodism and Marxism. Yes. And the church doesn't sort of reinforce that diminished Methodist tradition. It's all actually basically Marxist in its analysis.
Oh yes, absolutely.
Sorry for the
interruption. No. I was just going to pick up something you said earlier. You mentioned Hillary Clinton. It takes a village. Yeah. You mentioned a bit earlier Ron DeSantis. Now, I just am going back a little bit to him because I remember you had a particular love of America. In fact, we did an event together once, which was all about America and Britain together.
Yeah.
Do you remember that?
I do remember, yeah.
With Justin Webb, I think.
Yeah. We gave away a lot of his books, I remember.
That's right, yes.
And we've been friends ever since.
Gave away. Do you think, when you look at conservatism in America, because America, it seems to me, I have been astounded and so dismayed by what I see happening. Do you think that Ron DeSantis is actually the answer, or at least the best hope for conservatism in America?
I think he's impressive. I'm not entirely sure. Right. What I think is probably the most impressive achievement of conservatism anywhere in the world in recent years is, and this may be a little bit controversial, what I'm about to say, but neither you or I have ever shied away from controversy, Peter,
I have a feeling it won't be actually, but go on.
Yeah, is the 50-year battle to turn the Supreme Court of the United States from a liberal to a conservative institution.
Right.
And I think it may well be that by the time this is broadcast, we might know where the Supreme Court has actually gone on Roe versus Wade.
Yeah.
We know that it's now saying the state's discrimination against religious schooling is unconstitutional. It is basically, I think, reinforcing what always should be an important part of conservatism, is that yes, we are a philosophy interested in the freedom of the individual, but actually we should also be a philosophy that's interested in freedom of association.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things that's actually made conservatism vulnerable over the years. We've looked too individualistic, and the sort of the debate has been framed as the individual versus the state. When actually I think the debate should be much more about the individual and voluntary social private association against the state.
Yes. Yeah.
Because I think then you don't look like you're sort of a selfish, isolated philosophy. You're actually saying actually what matters is family, community, trade unions, church, voluntary organisations. It's those institutions that people choose to join, and actually which can evaluate you, understand you as a human being rather than just a number. And I think what the Supreme Court's going to do with years of patient appointment throughout America of justices that understood the limited role of government, and that actually the most important thing government can do is actually to stand back. And I think that, and now there's 6-3 majority of conservatives on the Supreme Court, that's going to take a long time potentially for the Liberals to turn around. And so I think I wasn't sure whether Trump was good for conservatism, but I think if you just look at results rather than the moral, the ethical model he personified, the fact that he turned the Supreme Court during his time, with the help of the probably my favourite conservative politician in the world today, Mitch McConnell, the Senate leader, their nuts and bolts focus on getting those justices in place was really important. And of course in Britain, the Conservative Party is completely blind to the importance of these judicial and other appointments.
Exactly. This is what, because Blair, in some ways, not just Blair, but Blair was a catalyst for many things. But this has been going on. There's this layer, isn't there, Tim, left underneath government, which more or less stops it doing all sorts of things, isn't it? And I mean, I think that is why people feel so frustrated. I mean, what was it like working in the centre of government? I mean, you were at Downing Street for a while, weren't you? What was that like?
Very briefly, really very briefly. And it was, and this is where I have become a big critic of the Prime Minister, and I do hope that before too long he will be ousted, because I think Mrs. Thatcher thought her work had begun when she became Prime Minister. I think Boris, in a way, almost felt that his work had come to an end when he became Prime Minister. He'd become, what was it, world king or whatever he said he wanted to be when he was a youngster. It was very chaotic, and it's difficult. I watched it. Do you remember the Laura Kunsberg documentary on Brexit?
Yes.
And I watched it last Christmas, and it just was a reminder of how chaotic that period was. The country was ungovernable. All the efforts that Theresa May made to get her version of Brexit across the line, the hatred, those scenes outside of Parliament, where you had Remainers and Leavers constantly barracking each other and interviewers. You had death threats against MPs. It was an embarrassment to the country. There just seemed no way forward. There was huge marches in favour of a second referendum to overturn.
Utterly depressing.
Absolutely. Yeah. And the Laura Kunsberg document, I think, who's been, I'm a big critic of the BBC, but I think she was a superb political editor. I don't know what her views are even today. That's rare with modern journalists. But she just documented how Britain it really was paralysis, gridlock. And the Tories, of course, came 5th in the European elections in 2019. I think we were almost beaten by the Greens. Maybe we weren't even beaten by the Greens. And Boris Johnson took over a party that was in that position, took over a nation that was in that position, and won a general election and stopped the ultimate calamity, political calamity, of Jeremy Corbyn becoming Prime Minister. So I wouldn't underestimate the contribution he made in making that possible. And I think the bravest political decision of modern times really was his expulsion of the 21 Conservative MPs who kept voting basically against any Brexit deal. I don't think the Conservative Party could have won that general election if that hadn't been done. That communication, we are really serious about getting Brexit. When you expel people like Ken Clarke from the Conservative Party, we should have had a kumbaya moment afterwards and reunited the Conservative Party, and that's my criticism of Boris. But so I would say he ended that, and that was a huge, and I saw him end that, and that was his great achievement. And I think we should all be grateful for that. But then the feet went up on the table, and nothing has really happened since to justify the trust that the people had in us. And of course, you and I are both Eurosceptics interested in sovereignty, but a lot of the people that voted for Brexit voted for a reset. They wanted real change, and we haven't delivered real change.
Who do you see in the round that could possibly be an alternative? Or is there no, I mean, the thing all the time one hears is, oh, but there's just nobody else. I mean, it's interesting because I've watched that again. People who've talked about slashing the licence fee and everything. There was a great documentary on the BBC about Thatcher. It was 3 parts. To be fair to them, they were very even-handed.
I thought so too, yeah.
And in it, one was struck by the seriousness of the people. I didn't particularly like James Pryor. I didn't particularly like Geoffrey Howe. It's not the point. The point was they were people with a hinterland. They were people, they felt serious. And you look now and you sort of think, well, actually, this is really the C team.
Yeah.
Do you feel that? I mean,
there's always the tendency, isn't there? You and I are both not as young as we were. And don't policemen look young these days?
Don't the judges look young?
And so, there's a tendency in all of us to think, weren't times better, rose-tinted spectacles, etc. But I think you can actually look, for example, at basic things like the time taken from an MP entering Parliament to becoming a minister, now compared to, say, the 1980s, which you were just talking about. And I think it's about 35 to 40% of the time that it used to be. So you're not getting that experience in being in 2, 3, 4 departments as junior ministers, making mistakes and learning from them. Having been round the block once or twice, so that when you get into cabinet, and for example, you're trying to deport refugees to Rwanda, you know how to get round the civil service who may try and frustrate you, or the judges that want to try and block you. You have a pedigree, you have an experience. And even Blair's team, of course, they all by nature of having been in opposition for 18 years, the Labour Party, when they were elected in 97, they had although held lots of shadow positions. So there was a pedigree there, and there was Justin Webb. A good friend, if I'm allowed to say that without damning him, a good friend who presents the Today programme, slightly jokingly said, I just wish after ministers appeared on the Today programme, they didn't do any media for the rest of the day. They just concentrated on their day jobs. And I think, you never know, you ask me who's in the ether, I don't know, and you never really know the strength of a tea bag until they're in hot water. But the focus, the constant presence now of social media, 24/7 rolling news channels, the politicians compared to Margaret Thatcher's day, compared to the past, their ability to just sort of not be distracted, to focus on is, I wonder whether even if Mrs. Thatcher was around today, Ronald Reagan was around today, would they be as effective as they could have been, as they were in their own day?
Yes, because Thatcher famously didn't read the papers, did she? I mean, she did not read the papers.
Bernard Ingham, I think, briefed her and told her what she needed to know, rather than,
Yes, but I think it would be. I mean, as for you, Tim, have you taken a step back from all the activities that you did? I mean, that's you were doing just about everything. Conservative Home, Centre for Social Justice, column in the Times, all of that. There must come a point actually where you just sort of think, I've got to take a break.
Yeah. Peter, you've been a good friend to me over the years, and you know a little bit more about this than perhaps most people. But I think I founded the Unheard website. I think that was one of the last times.
Yes.
You wrote a little bit for us then when I was at Unheard, and it wasn't probably the happiest chapter in my life, and certainly not the most successful. And my mum's theory was that I basically reached a stage of burnout.
Yes.
And I don't even now fully understand it. But shortly after I sort of stepped aside from Unheard because I was finding it too much, lockdown happened, and I live on my own, and I found lockdown incredibly difficult. And I think it's probably one of the first times I've actually spoken about it, talking about it now. But I did reach really dark moments. You know, being on my, perhaps it's partly affected the way I see lockdown, but I really did reach some dark places in lockdown. Just sort of thinking, you know, do I want to go on really? You know, I would never committed suicide or anything like that. But part of what I hope, you know, when you've been through tough times, I think you wonder what's the point of it all, what's the purpose. And I hope, having come through it, and I really do feel like I've beaten it now, although you're always aware of your fragility, having been through an experience like that. I just think I would want to be there for people who may be about to, or in the years ahead will face those. Is don't ever give up. Don't give in to that darkness, because better times, you can get through it. You may not think you ever can, but you really can. And I'm bursting at the moment with ideas. I'm incredibly keen to get on with new projects. And but if you know, I think there was times when you saw me, I was not in a good place. But people should not give up. Don't ever give up. You know, you can get through these things.
When I did see you just around about the time of Unheard. When we're talking about Unheard, by the way, we're talking about the site, which is
UNHERD. If I can do a bit of promotion. I
just remember thinking you were exhausted.
Yeah.
And you know, who could possibly blame you? Had you? We're talking about depression, really, aren't we?
We are really. Yeah.
And I mean, had you had that before, or was this a new thing for you?
I don't think so. I think my mum's diet, you call it exhaustion. I think it was depression of some kind. I think my mum's basic thing, I was worn out. And I think, you know, I live on my own, and I think that's can be a dangerous thing. And no one says stop. You know, you're doing too much politics, not enough leisure, whatever. And then I think it was exacerbated by, I think if I'd maybe not then gone into the lockdown situation where I really was isolated at times, maybe, you know, people like you and other friends would have been able to pull me back from some of the worst moments. But those long periods of isolation were tough.
Yes.
But,
I think they were for many people. But how did you get, or how have you got yourself out of it?
I was very resistant to taking drugs and medicine.
So nothing?
I was very worried that, you know, I've seen lots of people at my former Auntie Mary, no longer with us. Her character was completely transformed by medicine that she was taking just for, you know, physical ailments. And that made me very skeptical. But I did eventually take medicine, and it was the thing that moved roller coasters of moods into a much flatter. But it did actually flatten me. That you know, I did. Although it stopped the sort of real emotional ups and downs, it also made me sort of feel slightly unenthusiastic about everything. So I knew while they were helping me, I didn't want to stay on them long term. Right. And I'm now almost completely sort of off them. I've been very careful at how I stage that, because you don't ever want to leave them too quickly. But it was medicine. You know, it was medicine that made a difference. Counselling I tried in various forms, but it didn't help. But friendship was friendship from very, very good people, and the medicine made the difference.
I think, you know, it's like when I've had these episodes, I remember my father telling me, who used to have them too, he said to me, best thing you can do, first of all, he said what you just said, that things will get better, but also that to recognise when it's coming, and you also, if you get quite savvy about that, and how you can fend it off at the pass, if you know what I mean. But I would say, this is why I'm interested, why I'm pursuing this bit, is that I'm a firm believer that when it comes to relationships and when it comes to life, an involvement in something outside of yourself is crucial. Now, nobody could have been more outside himself in that way than you, actually. I mean, your whole life was about something like that. And I think that, in a strange way, might have been temporary undoing, but it will also be your strength. I mean, you're about to do something new, aren't you?
Yeah, and this is, you said I've done lots of different things, but in a way, all of the things that I've done have been the same in some way, is that I've always been a believer in...
Well, no, what I mean really by that, Tim, is that I'm saying you've done lots of different things. Put it this way, there's no one else that's doing or has done what you've done.
Well, thanks. And you've always been supportive, and I've always appreciated that. But I think my basic, I've basically been interested in conservatism. And I think that the conservatism that I tried to describe earlier, that conservatism of moderation, always, whether it's cultural extremism, democratic statist extremism, or economic libertarian extremism, conservatism has always stood against those things. It's always tried to say, we don't know it all. No age knows it all. We all stand on the shoulders of previous wisdom that have been given to us by our ancestors, and so we will always be that moderating influence. I think when Mrs. Thatcher was very focused on the free market, I think she was still in the conservative tradition. She was just trying to moderate what in the 1970s was very powerful unionism and excessive taxation. It just because that was what was needed as the moderating force then doesn't mean it's still the moderating force. We should always be looking at where the extremism is. And I think you could argue some of the extremism now is about big business, big global businesses that are detached from their communities. Citizens of nowhere, I think, was how Theresa May described them in perhaps our only, or one of her few memorable insights.
Well, yes, I remember being quite lifted above by that speech, actually. I remember, oh gosh, she knows what it's about.
But I think I'm returning to that really with the Conservative Home website, which has been superbly edited by Paul Goodman since he took it over from me, supported by Lord Ashcroft. Conservative Home is largely kind of focused on the British Conservative Party today.
Right.
And what I want to do with the project that is going to be called the Conservative Project, it'll be like Conservative Home in that it will be daily updates.
Right.
But it launching in about 6 weeks' time, and it will be a website dedicated to where conservatism in Britain and around the world needs to go over the next 10 years, because I don't think there's that long-term thinking taking place at the moment. And at the end of this decade, it will be 50 years since Thatcher and Reagan began their revolutions.
Good Lord.
And they used the 1970s to think very deeply about what, if they got into power, Keith Joseph and Margaret Thatcher at the Centre for Policy Studies, similar organisations in Washington did it for Reagan. They thought very deeply, what do we want to do with power? What's gone wrong? And what I want the Conservative Project to be is a place where Conservatives can come and debate these big questions. What do we do about China? How do we rebuild the family? What do we do in a culture where the attention span is so short, when teachers seem to be indoctrinating children? The pension bill. What do we do if we're unwilling to use biotechnology to bioengineer humans, but other regimes in authoritarian parts of the world are doing so? What does all this mean? And I hope, I mustn't announce it now, but a leading Conservative who I think quite differently from on many issues is going to be the chairman of this organisation. And what I want to communicate with the appointment and how we operate is that I think I know some of the answers to those questions I've just been asking, but I want it to be a place where if you disagree, you can come and you can argue and you can make your points and we can all decide together. So it's I think it's been a long time since I've been very excited about anything, but I'm about political work. But I'm really excited about this, and I think it's definitely helped. It's been a process. I'm not sure which was the chicken or egg came first, but I think the recovery of my health and the enthusiasm for this project are sort of tracked alongside each other.
So it's called the Conservative Project.
It's called the Conservative Project, yeah.
And it's launching in 6 weeks' time.
About 6 weeks.
So when you say launching, what should people look for? A website?
Be a website, and I want it to be quite bloggy.
Yeah.
One thing I found, I can, as people may have noticed in this broadcast, I can talk quite for a long time about all sorts of things. I found it actually very difficult to write since I've had my mental anxieties. I can write tweets and I can do short pieces, but actually long form journalism I've struggled with. So it'll be quite bloggy in nature, that I'll be putting up charts, I'll be putting up links, doing little videos and things. But I want it to be a place where conservatives, I think in Britain at the beginning, I don't want to run before I can walk, but around the world can come and ask these questions and think. I sort of get slightly depressed when the answer to everything from conservatives seems to be to cut taxes. We may want to cut taxes, but actually, is culture more important now for the conservative focus? Is actually, when we level up, is it about infrastructure spending, which seems to be the focus of this government, or actually is it about educational opportunity? These are the questions I want to ask, and I don't know the answers to all of them, but they're the questions I think we should be asking more.
Well, I mean, it sounds like a much needed. There isn't anything actually like it, is there? Really?
I don't think so.
There is. Actually.
I don't think so. No.
Well, all the very best with it. I'll look forward to. I'll look forward to that. Can you stay with us just for a few minutes while we talk to? I'm going to ask you a few questions for our exclusive members.
Of course.
In the meantime, thank you so much, and also for being so frank with us. Thank you very much indeed for that, Tim Montgomery. We shall see you next week on So What You're Saying Is. So thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Hello. If you're enjoying the New Culture Forum channel and you believe in our mission, may I invite you to join our membership scheme at the link below or on our website, newcultureforum.org.uk. Our work is more important now than ever, and we have great plans ahead for the future, but we can't do it without your support. From as little as £3 per month, you can help ensure that we continue on our mission. As a member, you'll receive a range of benefits, including access to exclusive content, invitations to our private events, including here at our studios, free copies of our books, and much, much more, including, of course, our famous NCF mug. If you aren't able to become a member, then please help us by clicking this button and subscribing to our channel. It's completely free. Just remember to also click the bell icon so that you can get notifications when we post new videos. Thank you.